So we're in the book of Revelation, the apocalypse. That comes from the Greek word apocalypsis.
It's time to change your world. It's time to let it go. The things you used to think, the things you used to know, they don't help you anymore. It's time to change your mind. If it's peace you want to find.
This is Kurt Kaikonen, pastor of Calvary Chapel, Waterford, at your neighborhood church. Today on Change Your World, we'll be in the book of Revelation. So grab your Bible. We'll be starting in chapter 12.
It's time to change your world. You need to let it go. Oh, oh.
So now we get this glimpse in verse 7 of the spiritual battle that's in the future that will be happening in the heavens. And so this is still the midpoint of the tribulation. Now, we've read about these kind of battles before. And these kind of battles, we don't see anything going on from our view, from the earth's view. But these things, they go on in heaven. So they're in a realm or dimension that we can't see. So these are not visible to us. But we've heard about this. We've heard about the archangel Michael. And we've heard and we've read about some of his past battles. And the first place we read about him was like back in Daniel 10, where the angel Gabriel, he's telling the prophet Daniel about this archangel Michael and how Gabriel, how he had been prevented from coming to Daniel until Michael came and fought against the prince of the kingdom of Persia, which gave Gabriel some relief so that he could come to Daniel. And that prince of Persia there, well, that was a fallen spiritual entity that had been over the area of Persia. Just like how this Michael the archangel, he in the same way as the prince of Persia, he's also called a prince of the people of Israel. So there are these spiritual entities, some good angels, some bad angels, that are over regions of land and they do battles. But Michael, he's considered to be like the guardian angel of the nation of Israel. So now we hear about this archangel Michael fighting with Satan over the body of Moses. And we talked about that last week. That's seen in the book of Jude. And now we have Michael fighting again, but this time it's with Satan again. But this time, Satan, he's kicked out of the heavens and he's kicked out with his angels. And when this happens, all heaven rejoices. And so we're told about this person with a loud voice where he says, "Now salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brethren who accused them before our God day and night has been cast down." And so we can see here that this is a future event, that this hasn't happened yet, because today, Satan, he still has access to God in heaven. And that's exactly what Satan does in heaven. All he does up there is he accuses us before God, just like he accused Job before God in the book of Job in chapter 1. And that's actually what the name devil or diabolos, the Greek name for devil, means. It actually means accuser. Or the name Satan, it actually means adversary. But Satan's words, they're only recorded, his actual words that he spoke, 3 places in the Bible. And every time that he did speak, he slandered somebody. Like in the Garden of Eden, the devil slandered God to Eve, implying that God lied to Eve, that God was keeping something good back from Eve. And then we see him also in the book of Job, where Satan slandered Job to God. And Satan accused Job of only worshiping God because of how God blessed Job. And that if God took away his blessings, that Job would no longer worship him. And then we see the devil slandering Jesus himself in the Gospels, where he kept saying to him, "Since you're the Son of God." And he slandered Jesus that way 3 times. And so after this battle, Satan, he's thrown out of heaven. And we see here, because we read of how these people who were accused by Satan, how they have been justified. And it doesn't say here that they're justified by anything that they did, that none of these people, they were ever found innocent on their own accord. Because it's like when the devil accuses them, just like when the devil accuses us, it's usually true and we're guilty. And I can't speak for you, but I would say that the devil, he would never have to make up any lies against me to accuse me of wrongdoings before God. And I didn't overcome the devil by myself. I didn't overcome the devil by my own power. And it's just like it says here. It says, they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb. Because the shed blood of Jesus, it gives us perfect standing before God in heaven. And then by them saying, by the word of their testimony, and I'll tell you that this is also my own testimony, just like it's their testimony, Jesus, he paid it all. And when I received his payment for my life, where I once was lost, now I'm found, and that's how I overcame the devil, just like how they overcame the devil. And so just to let you know, this isn't a magic potion. I've never had a physical drop of Jesus's blood ever on me. But what this means is that Jesus's blood, when it was poured out at the cross, that it was poured out on my behalf. And I've received that payment, and that blood that he poured out there was applied to my sin. And if you receive that payment and you ask him to apply his blood to your sin in faith, believing that Jesus actually did this and that he is who he claims to be, well, then you'll overcome the devil too. And then that will also be your testimony. And then you don't have to defend your lives anymore. And you're not going to have to worry about death, because death has been taken care of for us. Okay, so now Satan, he's been thrown down to earth, and he knows he only has a short time left. And that's exactly 1,260 days. And after those 3.5 years, he will not only be thrown out of heaven, but he will be thrown into the abyss, the abuso. And so now Satan, he's frantic. And so he's going to persecute the woman who's Israel. And now all these people, they know that Jesus is the Messiah. And so it says here that the woman is given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place, where she is nourished for a times and half a time from the presence of the serpent. All right. Well, this image, this is a repeated image. We've seen this exact image in the Old Testament when God delivered Israel from Egypt in the Exodus in chapter 19, verse 4, where it says, "You yourself have seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself." So again, this is another time where God, he will be taking care of Israel as he did from their original Exodus from Egypt. But this time it's going to be an Exodus from the Antichrist. And here where it says time, times, and half a time, well, a time means 1 year. And times, being plural, means 2 years. And half a time means half a year. So that's how they get that 3.5 years, or that 1,260 days. And then it says here that the serpent spewed water out of his mouth like a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood. So this looks a lot like that movie, The Mummy Returns, but a lot of commentators, they don't think that this will be a literal flood of water. They think it might be like the Antichrist army, the same way how the Pharaoh had sent his army after Israel back in the book of Exodus. And maybe the earth will open up like it did with Korah, Abiram, and Dathan, where the earth swallowed them alive, which is also written back in the book of Exodus. So if you notice here, a lot of this imagery of what we read in Exodus is the same imagery that we read here in the book of Revelation. So this is what tells us that the book of Revelation isn't really impossible to understand, because most of these symbols, they've already been identified for us somewhere else in the Bible. And since God is protecting Israel, Satan can't touch the woman. And so what he does is he goes against those that he can touch. And they're called here the breast of her offspring, which is believed to be the believing Gentiles who had come to faith in Jesus Christ during the tribulation. And even though Satan, he can kill their bodies here, he can't touch their souls, because they have also overcome by the blood of the Lamb, like we just read about. All right, so here we'll have a little review of where we are in Revelation to this point. Okay, the church has been raptured, the Antichrist has appeared, and he has unified the world, and he makes this treaty with Israel to rebuild their temple. And then during the first 3.5 years, there's these two witnesses of Jesus witnessing outside of the newly rebuilt Jewish temple in Jerusalem. And they testified not only by their words, but by these signs and these plagues. And they tell the world that this temple is not approved of by God. And then in the middle of the tribulation, after the 3.5 year point, the Antichrist kills these two witnesses, and then the whole world rejoices with them being dead. And then, because they're dead, the Antichrist goes into the temple into Jerusalem, and he demands to be worshiped as God. And that's when these Jews, they realize that they've been deceived by the Antichrist, and where they believe the message from those two witnesses, and then they flee from Jerusalem to the wilderness where God protects them. And then we see that the Antichrist, he rounds up all the Gentiles he can find that believe in Jesus, and then he kills them. So although the seventh trumpet has been blown, those bowls of God's wrath, they still haven't been poured out on the earth yet. And before this happens, and before we see this happens, we still have chapter 13 to go through and 14, where we learn about the beast, which is the Antichrist, and then we learn about another beast, which is the false prophet, and that's where the mark of the beast comes out, the 666 that everybody has to receive. And then in chapter 14, we'll see the removal of the 144,000 virgin Jews, where we find them now in heaven. And then lastly, we're going to have this witness of an angel warning the people of the earth not to take the mark of the beast. And then we will start this last 3.5 years with the 7 bowl judgments. So these are very exciting times. I'm very glad that I will get to miss them. And I'll be really glad if you get to miss them too. And all you have to do, if you want to miss these, is you just have to put your trust in Jesus. So last week in chapter 12, we pretty much looked at these two signs that appeared in heaven. The first being the woman with child, who we identified as the nation of Israel. And then a red, fiery, multi-headed dragon, who we identified as Satan, also known as the devil and the serpent. And then we looked at their adversarial relationship that began in the Garden of Eden that lasts until Israel flees from the city of Jerusalem during the middle of the tribulation period. So in chapter 12, John's vision was the signs of things that are happening in the heavens. But here in chapter 13, John's view will be the things that are happening here on the earth. And in chapter 13, it starts with, "Then I stood on the sands of the sea, and I saw a beast rising out of the sea." And in our version, it reads as if John is standing on the seashore, and that sea probably would have been the Mediterranean Sea, because that was the only sea that was known during his day. But in some versions, it doesn't say that it's John. In the New American Standard and in the NIV and in the Amplified version, it says, "The dragon stood on the sands of the sea." But whoever is standing there, this is what John saw. And if you remember, just a couple of weeks ago, the first mention of the beast was coming out of the bottomless pit. But here we see the beast is rising out of the sea. And pretty much everyone agrees that this sea isn't just a sea like the Mediterranean Sea, but what it's saying is that this beast will rise out of the sea of humanity, where here this sea symbolizes the Gentile nations, and specifically the European nations, from where Satan will bring forth his super leader, the Antichrist, who is a human man, who is possessed by Satan himself, and he's been chosen among all the people of the earth. And up to this point, the Antichrist, he's only been the head of a 10-nation league, the revived Roman Empire that's made out of these European nations. But now he's going to begin his new career as this new world dictator, the only one with all the power. Because if you remember, the Antichrist started as a peacemaker, where he settled all those Arab-Israeli conflicts with his promise to the Jews of rebuilding their temple in Jerusalem. And he allowed Israel to reestablish their national identity as being Jews, allowing them to return to their roots where they can begin their animal sacrifices again and perform all their rituals. where it all ends after 3.5 years, where this beast makes himself the god of their worship in the temple. And the word beast here means a wild beast. It's a dangerous animal. And it's that Greek word therion. And if you remember, those 4 living creatures in some of our translations, they were also called beasts, but that was just a bad translation for the word beast, where that word for beast was the word zoon, which means spiritual living creatures. So this beast, he's the dangerous type. He's a wild beast, and he rises out of the sea of humanity, and he resembles the description of that multi-headed dragon that we read about last week. And that's because the dragon, Satan, he possesses this man. So they have the same 7 heads and 10 horns, but here we see that this beast, that he gained 3 more crowns. And if you remember that those 7 heads that we talked about last week, that they were 7 mountains. And that's a veiled reference to the city of Rome, because this is about a Roman Empire. And those 10 horns being 10 kingdoms, which is a 10-nation European Union. And then in verse 2, it says that this beast, he was like a leopard. So it's not saying that he is a leopard, but he's like one. And it says the same thing about his feet, that they were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth was like the mouth of a lion. So now if you go back to Daniel chapter 7, you'll see this same stirring of the sea, but where Daniel, he just doesn't see one beast like we see here in the Revelation, but Daniel sees 4 beasts. And the first 3 beasts Daniel sees in his vision are the same exact animals that John sees here. But John doesn't see the first 3 beasts that Daniel saw. He only sees their traits. And John is seeing all those 3 beast traits all inside of that one beast that he saw, which is the same as the 4th beast that Daniel saw. And the reason for this is that those first 3 beasts are past. By John's day, those 3 beasts have already been forgotten in history. But here in John, we read the order as a leopard, and then a bear, and then a lion. But in Daniel, the order of these animals is reversed. And that's because Daniel, he's looking forward in time to the things that were going to happen from his day. But John, he's looking back into the past, because the lion, it represented Babylon during the time of Nebuchadnezzar. The bear, it was the Medo-Persian Empire, and that's the empire that replaced Babylon. And then the leopard was Greece, and that's the empire that replaced the Medo-Persian Empire. But that 4th beast that Daniel saw, that he described as a terrible beast with iron teeth, which also had 10 horns, with a little horn coming out of one of the heads and plucking out 3 of the horns, well, that was Rome. And that little horn Daniel was seeing on that 4th beast is the Antichrist himself. So Daniel, he's seeing the Roman Empire, and he's not only seeing it in the past, but he's also seeing the revived Roman Empire with this 10-nation confederation all the way up to the future, all the way into the end times. So Daniel, he's looking from his time forward, where 3 of those powers were no longer in existence by John's day. But John, he's looking backwards, where the only beast that's left to come is in the future, and that's the beast which he sees rising out of the sea. And it has the same attributes as those other 3 world empires of the past. And what they had in common was they all had a one-leader government, a world-ruling dictator. And this is really easy to picture if you look at Nebuchadnezzar's dream in chapter 2 of Daniel, where there was that head of gold, and that was Babylon. And then there was the chest and arms of silver, which was the Medo-Persian Empire. And then the belly of the thighs of bronze was Greece. And then the legs of iron was Rome. Where then this Roman Empire, this one of iron, in the last days is called feet of iron mixed with clay. And then it says where God will destroy this last empire with a stone cut from a mountain without hands. And then he establishes his kingdom. And so that stone that's cut without hands, that would be Jesus. And that kingdom that Jesus will be establishing is the millennial kingdom. So John sees is just a future extension of the same beast that Daniel saw. But John is seeing it way into the future, but it's the same Roman Empire. It's just been revived. And so when the world sees this Antichrist, they are not going to see a multi-headed beast like John describes here. But what they will see, they'll see this great orator, this wordsmith, a charming man who will start to rule with diplomacy. He'll probably be handsome and he'll definitely be charming. And although he comes out of Europe, he'll probably be Jewish, because if he wasn't Jewish, the Jews wouldn't accept him as their Messiah. And there's an interesting comment about him in Daniel 11:37, where after it talks about the little horn and the blasphemies that he speaks against God, where it says that he shall regard neither the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard to any God, for he shall exalt himself above them all. And by saying that he doesn't regard the God of his fathers, well, that's saying that he doesn't regard the God of Israel. And then by saying, nor the desire of women, some people have thought that he would be a homosexual. But the desire of women in Jewish culture during Daniel's day was that every Jewish woman, that she hoped and desired to be the one to bear the Messiah, to carry the Christ child. And so what this is saying is that the Antichrist, he will not be a practicing religious Jew, and he will not be known to have been a Christian. And so we're told he's been given all this power and this throne and his authority, and it all came from the dragon. So it's all Satan's power. And then we read what catapults him into international fame among all the people of the world is this healing of a mortal wound to his head that he receives. And a mortal wound, well, that's not a superficial injury. A mortal wound means it's a wound that kills you. And so this is a big deal. And John here, he doesn't explain how it happens or how it was healed. He really doesn't explain much about it. But he does mention this wound to the beast's head 3 times. And he says that it was caused by a sword. So it seems that at some point, there had to have been some kind of assassination attempt on the Antichrist's life. And some of the commentators, they'll actually say that they believe that he dies and he's actually brought back to life. And some people believe that this is also referring to another person that's mentioned in Zechariah chapter 11 called the worthless shepherd. Where in Zechariah, after we've read all these prophecies about the true shepherd, about Jesus, it talks about him raising up this worthless shepherd, where in verse 17 it says, "Woe to the worthless shepherd who leaves the flock. A sword shall be against his arm and against his right eye. His arm shall be completely wither, and his right eye will be totally blind." And so some people think that when this Antichrist, when he has this mortal wound, that he will be blinded in his right eye and one of his arms will be useless. And we're not told when this happens, but I'm going to take my best guess that this is going to happen right after the killing of those 2 witnesses of God who the Antichrist kills. And in the same way how those 2 witnesses were raised from the dead in front of the whole world, that the Antichrist is going to try to imitate that miracle.
To let it go.
Thanks for listening to Change Your World. Change Your World is an outreach of Calvary Chapel Waterford and your neighborhood church. If you're listening to Change Your World in the Detroit metro area, you can still make it to church today. And join us at 10 a.m. at Calvary Chapel Waterford, 183 South Winding Drive, Waterford, Michigan. We're competing with the Catholics. It's only an hour. All the donuts you can eat, and you don't have to believe a thing we say, but it could change your world.
You need to change your world.
The rest of today's message can be heard at yourneighborhoodchurch.org. So check us out and download the app. And until next week, remember,